All right. Hello, everyone. Glad you could all be here at this late hour. It's a pleasure to be debating with my opponent. We've never debated before. A lot of content to go over, so I'll just jump right in. So today I'll be affirming the resolution that college athletes should be paid. Now, my interpretation of this resolution is that it should be an option to pay college athletes, hence not outlawing the payment of college athletes for their efforts. So to start with the context and the background, college athletes are anyone participating in an organized full-time competitive sport sponsored by the educational institution which he or she is enrolled in. All college athletes must follow the NCAA guideline of amateurism, which gives regulations on student athletes, one of which is that they cannot receive a salary for participating in athletics. Now that we have that out of the way, let's examine the framework of the topic by discussing who this decision would impact. The main three parties being the athletes themselves, the college or university, or the viewers of said sport. Throughout the course of my argument, I will hash out why college athletes receiving pay would not only benefit themselves, but also the two other parties involved. If I can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that out of the three parties would benefit from the resolution, then we can say that the option of paying college athletes would be a positive change to the sport. And with that, I'll pass it over to my opponent and see what he has to say.
So the resolution of this debate is college athletes should be paid. In order to win this debate, the pro must provide a convincing argument as to why college athletes should be paid, meaning paying them is the best course of action. My challenge to the pro is that he show how it is beneficial for student athletes to be paid and how it is possible for them to be paid. In this case, the second and third order of effects are paramount. My counter as a con is plain and simple. College athletes should not be paid, meaning it is not the best course of action. In order to prove my case, I'm going to provide the judges and audience with multiple reasons why college athletes should not and actually cannot be paid for playing college sports. According to LSUsports.net, Louisiana State University has 16 different sports: baseball, men's basketball, women's basketball, beach volleyball, cross country, football, men's golf, women's golf, gymnastics, soccer, softball, swimming, and diving, men's tennis, women's tennis, track and field, volleyball. So when the resolution calls for the paying for college athletes, all students playing in these sports would be required to be paid, not just the athletes of one or two sports. This brings me to point one. College athletes are amateurs, not professional. The NCAA considers all college athletes to be amateurs in their individual sports. One of the reasons they are required to be amateurs is so that they understand their priority should be academics, not athletics. According to the NCAA website, in the collegiate model of sports, the young men and women competing on the field or court are students fourth, athletes second. The NCAA membership has adopted amateurism rules to ensure the students' priority remains on obtaining a quality educational experience and that all the student athletes are competing equitably. Student athletes sign a statement of understanding outlining that they are amateur athletes and must adhere to NCAA amateurism athletic restrictions. These restrictions include no contract with professional teams, no prize money, no tryouts, no benefits from an agent or prospective agent, no agreements to be represented by agent, no salary for participating in athletics. Key, no salary for participating in athletics. Students are not professional athletes. Students are not professional athletes who are paid salaries and incentives for a career in sports. They are students receiving access to a college education through their participation in sports, for which they earn scholarships to pay tuition fees, room and board, and other allowable expenses. In simple speak, these are students being given an opportunity for an education through their participation in the sport. These are not professional athletes who happen to take college classes. Colleges are institutions of learning, not sports franchises. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and pass the mic to my opponent.
Okay, excellent. So to start, just addressing some of your points. So you want me to prove that it's the best case of action for every college athlete to be paid. And that's not the point I'm trying to argue. There is a restriction on college athletes being paid whatsoever and receiving a salary. And I just think that should be an option in the future. And I'll get to some of your other points later in my argument. So to start with how this would affect the players, since they're the largest group affected by the resolution, obviously, the main way colleges lure in potential athletes is through scholarships, with the average college athletic scholarship in the United States being $10,400 as of a 2017 study by USnews.com, and only $8,700 if you exclude football and basketball scholarships. Now, many people, like my opponent, argue that a full ride scholarship is the sort of payment for these college athletes. However, I don't think that fully compensates for what they're doing. Full ride scholarships are given out to a number of different people in different situations, such as someone who gets a perfect score on the SAT, for example. However, making a perfect score on the SAT is not the same equivalent of service to your school as being a college athlete. Student athletes put their physical health on the line for their schools to the point that a recent livestrong.com study said that 13% of college athletes will have to face an injury of some sort in their time in college, and 25 million athlete exposures occurred from 2004 to 2009 in football alone in the NCAA's own statistics report. So this is a sacrifice the recipients of athletic scholarships do not share with their academic counterparts, and yet they are offered the same deal just by scholarships. The other big divide is that students that make a perfect score on the SAT are not raking in millions and millions of dollars for their school. A 2016 study by athleticscholarships.net showed that just 20 schools in 2016 profited $925 million after all expenses were paid from just football alone, excluding all other sports. This is an outrageous sum of money, with the University of Texas at the top with a $92 million profit. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, that's not every school, but a 2015 data set from USA Today shows that 56% of Division I athletic departments profit over $20 million. So the majority of these schools are making a large sum of money, which the college athletes get none of because of these regulations of amateurism. I think that's highly unethical, and it does not equate to the amount of scholarship money that they're getting towards books. And you have to think about what's at the best interest of the players, which I will get into more on my next point. With that, I'll pass it back to the people's champion to see what he has to say about that.
Okay, so point three, my third point is going to address what you're talking about what about the colleges. But first, let me start with point two, which is it is not beneficial to the athletes. So let's say we were to start paying college athletes to play sports. Let's also assume that salaries replace scholarships in big time men's college sports. So for the sake of arguments, let's also say college athletes were paid $100,000 per year. Right now, for a full athletic scholarship for a Division I school is about $65,000 if you enroll at a college with high tuition. So let me contrast it: $100,000 per year salary for versus a $65,000 a year scholarship. This is $100,000 paid for an 18-year-old kid fresh out of high school to play college sports. So first thing, since this is a salary, not a scholarship, the $100,000 is subject to federal income tax law. For a $100,000 salary, a student would owe $23,800 in federal income tax and $6,700 in state taxes, which is a total of $30,500. In cities that levy an employment payroll tax, these students' taxes go up about $2,400 per year. So the income tax then are about $32,900. And as an employee, the player would have to pay at least $2,000 in other taxes, such as local security, such as Social Security, for a total of $34,900. This leaves a college player with $65,100. And since college tuition is $65,000, the player has $100 left. And this hasn't taken into consideration paying lawyers or sports agents. By comparison, on scholarship, some students actually make money. Ohio State is one of the biggest and most well-known football programs in the nation. The average in-state tuition at the university is just over $10,000 a year. Yet the average athletic scholarship is $17,856 for male athletes. That's $7,856 that the average athletic scholarship recipient is making over the amount needed for school. In other words, these athletes are having their full tuition paid for in addition to the fees. Another important thing to mention is that we are still talking about paying people fresh out of high school with no financial experience hundreds of thousands of dollars. Giving an 18-year-old kid $100,000 per year cannot be seen as a good investment for the future. As evidence to this, I'm going to bring up a 2015 article from SportsIllustrated.com. The title of the article is 5 Reasons Why 80% of the retired NFL players go broke. In this article, it says most professional athletes go broke because they did not learn the proper financial planning in college. So with the average career span being 4 years, and I have about 44 seconds left. So giving a college student, a college athlete fresh out of high school, $100,000 with only a high school degree, with even less experience with finances than an NFL player, you're only setting them up for more failure. The end result would be college students making bad financial decisions, which result in them filing bankruptcy. So to recap, in some cases, making college athlete an employee would result in them having less money than they can get on scholarship. And it's fiscally irresponsible to give a kid fresh out of high school large sums of money, knowing they had no idea how to deal with it. 80% of professionals go broke, so it's reasonable to believe that amateurs would be worse, statistically speaking.
Okay, so you address some of your points. You start off by saying, they get $60,000 a year. So first of all, that's not an average. That's an outlier example. You talk about $100,000 a year and all the taxes. I'm not arguing that they should get $100,000 a year. It can be any wage, but paying them should be an option, not necessarily paying them a large amount. Lastly, you talked about how Ohio, they do get paid because they get more money than their tuition. Well, they still have the cost of books. In Ohio, they might need other things. It's it covers other things just besides the cost of tuition itself. There's other costs to going to college. Myself being a college student. I'll address your point about the NFL later, but to continue on to the path of the athlete's best interests, college basketball players spend 43.3 hours a week participating or playing basketball every week, with other sports also having statistics in this range, according to a recent ESPN study. And this puts college athletes participating in sports more hours a week than most Americans participate in their full-time jobs. On top of this, college athletes also have to balance schoolwork, as strict grade requirements are also upheld by universities, which also require athletes to be full-time students, meaning they have to take at least 12 credit hours. So you can see a part-time job or some other way to get an income is out of the question. The fact is that these students dedicate a large amount of hours while their school profits millions and millions of dollars from their work, which is morally just wrong. Now, to get on the schools and the NFL and how it benefit the students, first of all, paying college athletes would give them an incentive not to rush into the NFL. The NCAA did a study in 2015 that said 60% of Division I football players contemplate dropping out of the school to capitalize on professional careers, even though most of them don't actually go into the NFL, but they do contemplate dropping out of school to try and go into the NFL. According to the ESPN, 3.3 years is the average length of a NFL career. It is also noteworthy, according to the New York Times, only 50% of NFL players actually have college degrees, and 69.2% of professional baseball players return to college after the career is over. And so I would argue that giving them even just a small amount of money does teach them some financial responsibility, because the average NFL earning is actually higher than most Powerball winners get when they win the lottery. And both cases, both people go bankrupt, and they actually end up regretting it in a majority of cases. I don't believe that colleges should pay nearly as much as the NFL do. I just think they should be paid a wage to resemble in some way or shape or form their efforts they're putting into their school, and then also the amount of money that they're giving to the colleges. And with that, I'll pass it back to my opponent.
See, for my opponent's talking about this, we have to talk about second and third order effects. So he's saying that he's not saying it should be a large sum, but it should be some sum. So any sum of money that you pay a college kid, it has to be worth it. So what are you going to pay? Any way it goes, it's going to rise, and it's going to rise, and it's going to rise. And it has to be beneficial, because once universities start paying these college students, they're not going to be able to pay them and give them a scholarship at the same time. So it has to be commensurate with the amount that college tuition is, which is why I came up with $65,000, which is the average, and $100,000, which is the payment. So going back to my third point, which is college athletic programs cannot afford to pay athletes. So though it seemed like colleges are making money hand over fist, for most colleges, more money is going out than coming in. In 2015, Auburn University, they debuted their newest edition, an almost 11,000 square foot high definition screen in the stadium. The glow from the screen can be seen up to 30 miles away, and it came to the university at a cost of $13.9 million. People who believe college athletes should be paid see this cost and immediately say, if Auburn can spend this money on the screen, they can certainly spend money on paying their athletes. On the surface, this seems like a valid statement. However, what these people do not realize is that the Auburn Athletic Department posted a $17 million deficit the year before in 2014, and this screen was the equivalent of a Hail Mary pass trying to bring more money into the program. Auburn is not alone. In 2016, Rutgers University had a deficit of $36 million. An analysis was done in 2013 concerning the financial stability of public school Division I athletic departments. What this study found was that only 23 of 228 Division I schools were running their programs in the black, which would technically mean that only 23 of the 228 schools really had the money to pay their college athletes. In the business world, any business running in the red is very likely not hiring, and there is nothing to say that a college athletic team that pays its player would operate any differently. An open market system will not work for college. Some people believe that athletes should be paid based on an open market system. This would not allow for supply and demand to come into play, and a school would be able to pay an individual player based on the revenue that comes in due to their talents. This would leave smaller schools left out in the cold. The payment would vary depending on the local market and the deal that each athlete has with that school. However, the questions arise of how the value of a player will be determined, and what happens if an athlete is hired at a small rate of pay and then vastly improves over the season. What if a school plays a player a high wage and then they end up getting hurt? So what I'm saying is this. So when you talk about paying athletes. It's very simple. See, my opponent is saying that we should pay them some kind of wage, but it's really easy to say that they should pay some kind of wage and not identify where the money is going to come from and what the amount is. Like I said, it has to be commensurate with how much tuition you're paying. So if 65,000 is the average, then you have to say that, oh, this person is going to at least be paying 65,000. And that still doesn't take away from the fact that once you start paying these athletes, now they're going to be employees, and now they're going to have more taxes to pay and have even less money than they'd have by being on scholarship.
So to start with your point, you talk about 65,000. I can't find the statistic that says 65,000 is the average for athletic scholarships. Just over 10,000 when you include football and baseball. Okay. And you do bring up a valid point that it would kind of create the system where bigger schools that have more money would be able to get bigger players. But that's why many people that do argue for the side that they should be paid suggest a maximum wage. So schools can pay their athletes, but only to a fixed weight. That way it's not able to actually weigh out compared to the smaller schools. Now you talk about deficit spending for the colleges. So you look at some place like the University of Alabama, where they paid Nick Saban in 2017. His salary was $11 million. So I don't think it's, not reasonable for the 55 players on the team to get some sort of wage, especially when Alabama, after paying everything off, profits $46 million a year. If you paid every single person on the team, every single person at the athletics department, which there's 176,000 student athletes present Division I schools, which is about 508 athletes for each school. If you compare that to minimum wage and how much profit the average Division I school makes, which is $26 million, according to a Forbes.com study. Minimum wage doesn't even come close to comparing that. Let's double the minimum wage. Let's make it $14.50. The colleges would still have over $3 million in the bank after paying every single athlete double minimum wage for the hours that they spend on their sport. All right. You argued earlier about how that they are students first and athletes second. And I agree with you. I think that is true. But I think that you are actually harming them by not paying them, because you are pushing them into the grasp of the cataclysmic slum of money for professional sports careers. If you pay them money, they are naturally going to have an incentive to stay in college and not rush into a professional career, because they are not desperate for cash. You see time and time again how suspensions and penalties all strive from the need for money from these college players. Like in 2010, the Ohio State quarterback Terrell Peror was suspended for 5 games after selling his jersey to buy his mother a Mother's Day present. Or the 32 players in Charleston Southern University that in 2016 they got suspended for a game after they spent money for textbooks on other school supplies like papers and pencils. So overall, it's just beneficial to pay them because, one, it will reduce violations and suspensions, and 2, it's going to encourage them to stay in school. 3, it's going to teach them financial responsibility so they do not fall into the slum of the 80% of people in the NFL or in professional sports that actually end up going bankrupt. And with that, I'll pass it back to my opponent.
So first, let me say that the whole thing that if you unban being paid, that all of a sudden this will make college players more likely to stay in school, and that this will deal with some of the problem with athletes being paid, with college students being paid, is just an opinion. It's not based on fact. Because if you look at the fact that right now it's illegal for them to make money, and they're still being paid, once it goes higher, once you make it free so that they can get paid, then it's going to increase that, because now these big Division I schools are going to be able to pay more money, put more stuff, and do more illegal stuff, make more money, do more dedication, give players more money to get them to come to their schools, which is once again going to take away from the lower side of school. And once again, my opponent is talking about some wage somewhere. You can't possibly expect schools to pay students and give them a scholarship. Anyway it goes, once you start paying the students, it's going to cut their scholarship, if not completely. So point 4, it would cost other students their chances of going to college. It would cost school millions in salaries. As I've already mentioned, most Division I school, which is where elite athletes pay, are not making a profit. This raises the question, where would the money come from? One of the first things the colleges would cut is the other sports at the school, the sports that do not draw as much money to the school. Like I said, I outlined 16 different sports that are just at LSU. Next, the other thing that would happen is that the other university programs would be cut. For example, if the university had a small arts program with only 100 students and the university had to pay their students, you can take a well-educated guess on where the money will come from, and in the process say goodbye to the art program. And for the small non-Division I school, they would have no chance of recruiting any good athletes. There is no way to compete with a program that can afford to pay coming from a school that can pay. With 23 of 228 schools being able to break even, athletes would be completely unfair to smaller colleges. So I want to say this. So once again, my opponent still didn't address the fact that you would be, by paying the students, they would be making less money than they would be doing this because they'd have more taxes, they'd be employees and stuff like this. Also the fact that they have to pay agents, which they are not known to do. The fact that these are people coming out of high school that has no access, has no experience with large sums of money. And yes, it would have to be large sums of money because it would have to offset the amount of scholarships that they lose. And once again, my opponent hasn't talked about where the money would come from. You can say doing this, cut Nick Saban's salary, but 16 sports paying all athletes out of 16 sports. This is over 300 people that you're going to say that all of a sudden now the schools are going to have money. These are the same school programs that don't have the money now. The way the colleges make, the reason why colleges try to make so much money and do all these NCAA deals is so that they could afford to have big programs so that they can have the best players and offer more scholarships to the players. This is where the money is coming. This is where the money is going. It's going to these scholarships now.
Okay, so to start with some of your points, you talk about only a small select number of schools actually get to have the benefit of having money and profiting. Well, like I stated earlier, 56% of Division I schools profit over $20 million a year from just football, with just 20 Division I schools profiting $932 million just a few years ago. You said that these are just I don't have real life examples. There are examples of them people wanting to stay in school for money. One of them, if you look at someone like Johnny Manziel, right? Famous game, Texas A&M. He led them to beat Alabama, and he dropped out of school after 2 years, went to the NFL, did terrible in the NFL. Sorry, but now he's back enrolled in classes at Texas A&M, and he's gone on record saying that the money was just too much to pass up. Okay, maybe if he had a wage while he was in college, doesn't have to be, large, even if it's just minimum wage, that you are not going to have the same amount of people drop out desperately trying to get money from the NFL, which we can both agree on is a negative impact. You talk about how they're going to have less money if they get paid. That's not always going to be the case. Even if they get paid minimum wage, sure, they have to pay taxes, but they're not going to be in a tax bracket so much where it's going to equal them making nothing, because you know what? Scholarships and wages can coexist. If you are, the backup swimmer on the, male swim team, you can just get a scholarship and be happy with that. If you are the starting quarterback that every school in the entire nation wants you to go to, I don't think it's unreasonable for you to get a wage if your jerseys are making millions and millions of dollars on the school's website. I think it all can be subjective and be bought on a case-by-case basis, depending on the sport and the person. Lastly, I promised I'd talk about how this would impact the people who spectate the sport. I won't rehash the last few points, but obviously less players getting suspended and staying on the same team longer would increase fan enjoyment because it'd make for a more stable season. And beyond that, the referees will cause them to take the job more seriously. If they're getting paid, they're going to strive for more success in themselves. They're going to try harder at their jobs because they want to continue getting paid and possibly even get paid more if they really strive for success. If they work harder, they get a bunch of touchdowns, they sell more jerseys online, the school might pay them more, especially amongst the lower level players, which will create for an increased competitive atmosphere if there's constantly that rise and that thirst to get to the top. So just to rehash some of the points here that my opponent also talked about in this last one, he talked about how players would get hurt, and what if they get paid a bunch of money and then they get hurt. I argue that this actually would help colleges have a better incentive to condition their players better, such as like the University of Georgia a few years ago had several injuries during their season, and a lot of the blame fell on Mark Richt not conditioning his players correctly. If you are paying a sum of money to these people to play their job, you want to make sure they can do that at the best of their ability.
Okay, so he caught me a little bit while I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so a few things that my opponent still hasn't addressed yet. One, where is the money going to come from? You can't just say you're going to cut one salary. Second, how are you going to pay them? How are you going to subjectively be able to pay 16 sports and do this? You can't just say all of a sudden we come up with the money. Then also the fact that I brought up, colleges don't have the money to pay them now. Majority of the colleges, I'll say 80% of colleges don't have money now. They are operating in the red, which means they're not even turning a profit. So this money is just magically appearing from somewhere. Second, my opponent, when I brought up the fact that you can't say that all of us, at least let's talk about the impact that we have on smaller schools and the fact that other arts programs and stuff like that will have to come from schools. So, and then also the fact that for colleges, at least as you look at the pro circuit right now in professional football, in the way that if you look at the amount that a quarterback made then and the amount that a quarterback, say 20 years ago, and the amount that a quarterback makes now, and it keeps going up, how are colleges going to be able to compete with that same thing? You can't just say they're going to start paying, because anybody that knows sports knows that as the years goes on and players get better, the cap is going to keep going up higher and higher and higher. Colleges are not sports franchises. They're colleges. They're universities. They get money from the state, and they try to bolster and get other money from from sports and stuff like that in order to be able to do scholarships, in order to get a bigger name, to bring more money into the university, to hopefully to break even. So you can't say, like I said, there's no way that they could just all of a sudden just say magically that we're going to start paying people. So though there might be a couple of reasons why college athletes should be paid, there are many more compelling reasons why they should not be paid. Paying a student athlete will put universities in dire financial strait. It will cause other programs to be cut, and ultimately unfairly cause an imbalance in the college sports system, as some locals will certainly have more money to spend than others. Student athletes receive benefits for playing college sports, including a free education, housing, meals, travel, networking, and other perks, which give them a huge boost up in life compared to their peers who are usually graduating owing thousands of dollars in student loans. College athletes play sports for two reasons: the love of the game and the chance to make it to the pros. If these students started getting paid, colleges and the university athletic department would turn into enterprises, and this would tarnish the college athletic system. All the shenanigans that occur in the pros would likely happen in college sports. Students would start holding out on contracts because they want more money. Unions would spring up that would focus on the rights of college athletes, and there would be lockouts if these athletes are not happy with the university that they are playing for. All this craziness that's in the pros that turns people off from the professionals would then exist in college, which is not a net positive, which is once again a negative. So we have a negative for the spectators, and we have a negative for the fact that the college athletes would have even less money because now they would be paying taxes.
Okay, so you addressed several things. I'm going to try and get to them all. You asked, where's the money going to come from? Like I said several times, 56% of Division I schools profit over $20 million. That is money that they're making from the football department. And sure, some of it probably goes to other things, but most of it goes into a bank. Okay, but it's not unreasonable for them to just take a small sliver of that and pay the 55 people on the average football team. You talk about smaller schools and program cuts, right? Smaller schools, that this kind of applies to them a bit, but mainly this is the option to pay your players. Okay, smaller schools, they normally don't get the best players anyway, because there's the inherent part of competitiveness that students or athletes want to, if they are good, they want to also be on a team that's good, and so they're already not going to go out of the way to go to a smaller school they think does not have as good of a team. You talk about stuff like art programs being cut, music programs being cut. I don't think that's the case whatsoever, especially since they are profiting this money. It's not like they're taking this money that they're making from, like, let's say a program like Alabama, and they're saying, oh, let's just we're barely going to break even after we play everything, guys. They're increasing the pay of all their staff. Everybody's making more money, not just Nick Saban. Their offensive coordinator, their defensive coordinator, they're all getting their pays raised millions and millions of dollars. So it's not like they're actually just breaking even every season, especially when they're profiting $46 million due to a ESPN study recently. So I think it's a little unethical to say, oh, well, you can't, just make this money come out of nowhere, because they are already proven to be profiting the money. Now, once again, you talked about student getting paid less. I already talked about that in my last point, so I don't want to harp over it again, but they can be offered scholarships. If they are making a significant amount of money, it should be the option for them to be offered wages.
Okay, so my opponent keeps saying there is profit, and I've went over this over and over again, that colleges that 80% of colleges do not make a profit. They make just enough to put right back into the football program. There is no profit that he's speaking of. And then my opponent says that there's no way that there's no reason why you can't just cut some of the coaches' salaries and then pay some of the football team. The resolution is college athletes should be paid, not the football team should be paid. This is all 16 sports teams. Okay, then he talks about the scholarship. No university, how is it fair to a university to have to pay a athlete a scholarship and pay them a fee. That doesn't pass the common sense test. So for all these reasons, because there's no magic, vote con.
Okay, so just a few of your points. You said 80% of colleges. You're not watching Greendale Community College football team every day. You're watching Division I schools most of the time. So that's the biggest example. First of all, you are right. It's college athletes, not just football players. Football is just the biggest market. So I think that's a pretty good indicator for the rest of it. But I agree that if it becomes necessary, if you have an Olympic swimmer going to your college, they should have the option to pay them if it comes to that point. You said cut coach's salary. I didn't suggest to cut coach's salary. I said they're clearly making a profit because they're able to pay all their coaches more money. If they were not making a profit and they were not increasing their revenue, they would not be able to pay their entire football staff more money. I urge you guys